And joining me now to talk more about the importance of the Colorado River is Colorado Senator Michael Bennet. He recently actually traveled down the river with his Republican colleague from the state next door, Utah, Senator Mitt Romney, to try to shed light. The climate change issue is real, and now it's impacting people's lives. Senator Bennet, welcome. And just let's talk about this trip down the river. You guys decided to do this right after the federal government announced for the first time that they were going to have to do some restrictions on water use from the Colorado River. So, look, this was clearly about bringing more attention to this. But what else did you learn on this trip?
Well, you know, the other thing that happened, Chuck, this summer was there was one day when the worst air quality in the world was in northern Utah and Denver, Colorado, worse than Beijing because of the fires from California. And so I said to Mitt, you know, maybe we ought to spend some time on the river talking about climate, talking about forestry and water issues. And I brought some people from Colorado. He brought some people from Utah. And basically what we were trying to do was establish and reestablish some relationships, because these states are going to have to come together to figure out how to manage a resource that is half of what we thought relies on that river, and we're not making any more water. So we're going to have to, in our own time, just as our forebears had to figure out in theirs, figure out how to create a sustainable economy with an approach to the river. At the same time, I hope we can reach forward on climate change legislation, because that's really why the river is in the condition that it's in.
You know, I love this quote from the Colorado Farm Bureau president. He said, you know, politicians can't make it rain, they can't make more water, but they can be sympathetic. So I guess what is the role of the federal government here in trying to, because look, the great fear is that this, instead of Colorado, Utah, Arizona working together, and Nevada on this issue, you go to in the state of Georgia, you know, sue each other over water issues. Right. What role do you think the federal government should play in making sure that doesn't happen out west?
I think it's really important that it is not a top-down approach from Washington, D.C. That's destined to fail. What's really important is that the upper and lower basin states come together and create a rational framework and expectation for how we're going to manage this resource in the coming years. I think the federal government can support that with resources, which we're doing in the reconciliation package and the bipartisan bills. We actually end up able to pass those. But that's going to be a continuing need. There's going to be more need for water infrastructure. There's going to be more need to help farmers and ranchers along the way. And there's going to be more need to develop innovative technologies to save water and conserve water. And everybody's going to be in it together. And I think the federal government can play an important role doing that. I also think, my own view is that it's very important for us to make some big moves on climate change at the national level, to have a clean electricity standard, to put a price on carbon, so that we can address the root causes of this issue. Because the farmers in Colorado can't address those root causes on their own.
No, they can't. And that's what I feel like that this is going to be where their disconnect is. Like, on one hand, you talk about the big issues that we've got to deal with to protect us for the next 30 to 50 years. But in the meantime, these farming communities, this is their livelihood. This is about survival now. They're not going to, you know, 30 years from now, that's nice. And they're certainly, I think you talk to plenty of farmers, they're worried about the next generation, but they're more concerned about whether they can survive in this fight over water. I mean, I understand we can't have a top-down approach, but you saw that in Nevada, we're going to have water police, right? There's water agricultural community. There's going to be perhaps more of an enforcement mechanism in order to conserve water.
I think that it's much more likely that we're going to find our way through an agreement among farmers themselves in their states. But I'll give you another example of something that's a live issue that the federal government really could do. After last year, Colorado had 3 worst fires in our state's history as a result of climate change. And I asked, what would it cost watershed protection that is of our national forests in the West? And the answer was $60 billion, which is about what we spend fighting fires over the course of 5 years. But when you fight a fire, it costs $50,000 an acre to fight that fire. If you can do the forest mitigation, it costs about $1,500 an acre, and it can give our farmers and ranchers a real sense that we're protecting the resource, and they do deeply care about of Americans. I think that if we were able to pass that in Washington, put a serious investment on the landscape and in our watersheds, be able to say to farmers and ranchers, that's actually what climate legislation looks like, you might find yourself building a very unusual coalition of people to support the next round of effort around climate change.
You're an eternal optimist about working across the aisle. Look, when we're doing this interview, and it's possible people will be watching this, maybe we've gotten through this round of dysfunction. But why should people be optimistic that we're going to see a bipartisan consensus start to tackle this?
I don't think people should be optimistic about it. I think we as a country have to work hard for it. It turns out that democracy is much more difficult than any of us ever thought, certainly than I ever thought. I think the women that spent decades fighting for the right to vote, the self-evident right to vote, they probably felt that it was more should have been people who fought for the self-evident proposition that one group of humans shouldn't own another group of humans. We have those fights in our own time, and it would be wrong for us to expect that it's going to be easy to do it. There are people in Washington, D.C. that are completely unwilling to work with each other and address, for example, climate change. And we have to address climate change. But ultimately, and this is over the long term, Chuck, ultimately, what we're that we think of as American climate policy, just like we used to have something called American foreign policy. Right. And whether you were a Democratic president or a Republican president, you knew what your job was with respect to the Soviet Union. That's what we've got to do with climate. I know that seems impossible today, and I'm not here to be Pollyannish or ridiculous about it. Right. I'm here to say the only way we're going to create a durable policy solution that we can pass to our kids and to our grandkids if we can get past the ridiculous politics that we're in right now and create something durable. And as long as I've got a chance to work on it, I'm just going to keep working.
The debate should be how we do it, not whether we should do it. And I think that's what you're trying to get there. Michael Bennet, Democrat from Colorado, really appreciate you coming on.